morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where we have some very interesting stories to discuss today. None of them are huge headline makers, but I think they have the potential to be later on. And they all involve movies and talent that I think many of us are rooting for. Now, the first story I find particularly interesting because it seems to almost come directly out of my reaction, and I've also seen other people have the same reaction to Sicario. Now, when I reviewed Sicario, I said they might be promoting this as Emily Blunt's movie, but it's Benicio Del Toro's movie. He has the backstory, he has the big action sequence, he is the most compelling character. And I think that it was a mistake to tell the story of Sicario from the point of view of Emily Blunt's character. So lo and behold, Lionsgate just announced, after an amazing debut weekend for Sicario and limited release, by the way, that they are planning a sequel to Sicario, actively developing it, and it will focus around Benicio Del Toro's character. Denis Villeneuve, the director, is involved, as is the writer of the film, and Lionsgate is very heady on this. And it was interesting because I think they're aware that this kind of announcement is a little bit of a blow to Emily Blunt. Because after such a great weekend at the box office, as I said on Movie Math yesterday, it makes it look like that's all thanks to Emily Blunt, that she pulled people in. And she might very well have, because remember, this was billed as Emily Blunt's movie. Nobody going in to see the movie, for the most part, because you might have seen my review or others, but for the most part, everybody going in thought that this was an Emily Blunt actioner, but then of course discovered it was a Benicio Del Toro actioner. But to have this story come out on the heels of that boffo debut and say the person we're giving a sequel to is Benicio Del Toro, I think just kind of takes some of the wind, if not almost all the wind, out of Blunt's sails. Now, they tried to be very diplomatic, and they were like, oh, we also don't know what's going to happen to Blunt's character. Who knows, so I thought that was very interesting as well, and we'll see if, potentially they would want to have something include her. But her name hasn't been mentioned in relation to the sequel. Now, one could argue that Emily Blunt's simply too busy to sign on for a sequel and has too many other exciting projects that she's attached to. For instance, one of the stories today is about another Emily Blunt film. But anyway, although it just occurred to me that that's huge spoilers to say that, we're going to do a movie about Benicio Del Toro's character, a sequel, that kind of gives away that he, survives the movie. But there are a lot of other interesting things going on there. And as I said, in my review, he was basically playing the South American Batman. And some people pointed out he's Puerto Rican, but in the movie, he plays someone from South America. But he's fantastic in Sicario, and I have to say, while I did not like the film, although I did like the action sequences, they were superb, I would be very interested in a Benicio Del Toro sequel, because I thought he was the best thing in the movie. And again, it really should have been his movie to begin with, and they're gonna course correct with the sequel. So I'm curious, for those of you who've seen Sicario, do you think that's the correct direction to go with for the sequel? Do you agree with the decision being made over at Lionsgate? Also, what do you think, if you were on Emily Blunt's team, and perhaps you are on Team Blunt, how do you feel about this? What do you think of because so much of success is perception, how do you think this makes Blunt look? Alright, so that's the first story of the day, and very interesting indeed. Now, the second story of the day, I guess I could segue into the Blunt story, that she's involved in, but I think this other one's a little, it's debatable which is the bigger story, but I'm just going to go in the order I wrote them. But I put second a really good story that broke yesterday about Jordan Peele of Key and Peele. Now, as we all know, Keegan-Michael Key of Key and Peele is doing much better than Jordan Peele. He's the one getting all the, the cameos and small, character roles and a lot of big projects. He was in Vacation. He was in Pitch Perfect 2. He was in Tomorrowland. He's just getting a lot of work. And Peele is nowhere to be seen, really, except Modern Family. But he's being very, entrepreneurial, and he is making his own opportunity with the king of letting people make their own opportunity, Jason Blum. That's right. It turns out that Jordan Peele is not only a fan of comedy, but also of horror, and he is going to make a horror film. He has written it, and he will direct for, again, Jason Blum's Blumhouse shingle. Now, this is really fast. He really does seem to know his horror, but let me explain to you what he's going to do. Because he's not just making a horror movie, he is making a horror movie that has some social commentary. Like in some degree, I wonder if it'll have any comedic aspects at all, since that's what his brand is, but this is really fascinating. So it's called Get Out, and it's about a young African-American man who goes to visit his Caucasian girlfriend's family estate. Ooh, right? Like right there, you're like, that's a pretty good setup. But he goes even further, and this is the quote that he has said that's gone out with this announcement. And he said, "Get Out takes on the task of exploring race in America, something that hasn't really been done within the genre since Night of the Living Dead 47 years ago. It's long overdue." And that's fascinating. First of all, the Key and Peele comedy sketches also often have a very strong social commentary element to them. And I think they're very effective. I think a lot of the things that they're said in Key and Peele comedic sketches are not only hilarious, but on point, and they are thought-provoking. So I think that he already has shown some social responsibility with his comedy. So it'll be interesting to see how he does with horror. But also, he's right. Night of the Living Dead was one of the very first films ever, period, forget just in the horror genre, to have a African-American, hero, the lead actor. And, it's never really commented on when people bring up that film, but it was really groundbreaking for not only what it did for the horror genre, but also for its casting. But unfortunately, it never quite stuck, and, it didn't really lead into anything, but it is, I think, an important moment in cinematic history. And also, when you think about it, he's right. Even though Night of the Living Dead, Jordan Peele's right, even though Night of the Living Dead changed the way, changed who was the lead and the hero and changed how people saw horror movies, it didn't lead to any black characters being the lead in any of the horror movies. Like, nobody tried to emulate that, even though clearly it didn't hurt Night of the Living Dead. So I think that's a really interesting call, and instead you still have a situation where in horror movies, black characters are often there just to die first. For instance, I reviewed Cooties just yesterday, and in Cooties, there's really only one black character who only shows up to die. He's the first, substantial death, I believe at least the first adult death, and you've never seen his character before. He just suddenly shows up as a teacher on the playground, and I was like, when I was watching it, I was like, really? Are they really? Oh, they did that. That's crazy. It must be I said there's a chance it was meta, but it was not very, very well meta executed. But that's really where you've seen black characters, unfortunately, put in the horror genre. So I think it's great that Jordan Peele is going to try and change that. But, also I have to say at the end of the day, maybe he should have Keegan-Michael Key in it, because I think people are more interested in seeing Keegan-Michael Key, unfortunately, than Jordan Peele. But let's see. Blum has not only made a lot of careers, but saved a lot of careers. Of course, most notably, M. Night Shyamalan's with The Visit. So he's very, very good, and he's a great person to hook up with. All right, so that's the second story of the day. Now, the third story is back to that other Emily Blunt project, and this is Girl on the Train, where she's going to be the lead. And Girl on the Train is being called the next Gone Girl, despite not having a lot of the elements of Gone Girl. But the reason it's being called the next Gone Girl is because it's a female-centric thriller, although when you think about it, Gone Girl was actually a male-centric thriller, right? I mean, it had a very strong female character, but Ben Affleck's character was, of course, the lead. But anyway, Emily Blunt's character will be the lead, but the reason people are so hot on this project is because it's like apparently the fastest selling, adult novel in history or something like that. And it's about a woman who will be played by Emily Blunt, who is a lonely divorcee who every morning on the train to work sees this perfect couple at one of the stops. So she likes to fantasize, humorously about what their life is like, right? It's kind of cathartic for her. But then one day, you know how this goes in movies, she sees something she shouldn't have seen, and she gets sucked into a web of intrigue. I think it's fascinating. They just announced that Liam Neeson has signed on for a movie called The Commuter, which is basically the exact same movie. He's not a lonely divorcee. They didn't mention that, but he's someone who commutes to work every day, and on the train he sees something and gets drawn into a web of intrigue. So I was like, Girl on the Train versus Liam Neeson on the train. But it's very interesting. But they're really rounding out a solid cast here, and it's all in the strength of this book, and I think the idea that it would be the next Gone Girl. So it's going to star Emily Blunt, and Rebecca Ferguson chose this project over Gambit, I think because, the pedigree of it, who's involved, it's a very hot project. And also, I think she wasn't a good match with the Belladonna character in the Gambit film. But anyway, so Rebecca Ferguson, hot off of Rogue Nation, is going to be in here. Haley Bennett. And then it's directed by Tate Taylor, which I think is like the big red flag for this project. Tate Taylor did The Help, which of course really put him on Hollywood's map. But then one of his follow-up films was Get On Up, the James Brown story, which of course helped Chadwick Boseman's career, kind of. I guess it didn't really so much help Chadwick Boseman's career as thankfully it did not torpedo it, after he played Jackie Robinson. And of course Chadwick Boseman has gone on to play or he's going on to play Black Panther. But Tate Taylor, I don't think he's very inspired a director. I think he just kind of, he's one of the, we've been talking about cinematography, etc. lately, and directing, and I think that Tate Taylor is one of those directors who simply records what's happening on set. I don't really think he adds anything, any visual language, or raises the tension, or, does anything of any particular noteworthiness with the camera. But, maybe he's an actor's director, but still, Scott Cooper is an actor's director for Black Mass, and he still is able to come up with some inventive shots with his film. But anyway, Tate Taylor, I think the short of it is no David Fincher. So I have a real question as to whether or not this can come together the way it needs to. Because let's not be mistaken, while Ben Affleck and Rosamund Pike and the rest of the cast were quite good in Gone Girl, and the writing was good, it had a hell of a twist, I think the atmosphere was a huge part of that movie, which made it feel like, cinematic and worth people's time and something special. And that's something that Fincher delivers in spades. But I don't see Tate Taylor delivering that. But anyway, why is this in the news? Well, it's in the news recently because it's attaching some male actors. And what male actors they are. They're perhaps two of the biggest names in the comic book genre right now. Jared Leto, a.k.a. the Joker, and Chris Evans, a.k.a. Captain America. So they will be having a DC Marvel crossover to some degree in this movie. I think Jared Leto, it's not too surprising to see him in this movie because, he's an Oscar winner. He's a prestige actor now at this point after Dallas Buyers Club. He's very highly regarded. And, he's been someone who's had a very eclectic resume to begin with, and I think that, it would be interesting to see him in something that's so mainstream, considering the director, Tate Taylor, but I think Jared Leto makes sense with this group of actors. But the really interesting thing, in my opinion, is Chris Evans, because Chris Evans is, obviously Captain America, but he's never been able to find any success outside of that character, really. I mean, he's had a lot of tries. He was Johnny Storm at first, but he's just never, ever clicked in any movie, really. I mean, this guy never really has had a strong success until he came over to Marvel, which is one of the reasons I believe he was thinking of quitting acting. But even as Captain America, he has not been able to find a viable outside project to, kind of establish himself, not so much just as Captain America to audiences, but Chris Evans. So the fact that he would be in this film, I think, is very interesting indeed with this group of, with this cast. So I think that's very exciting for Chris Evans' career. And let's see if he is elevated by the material or by him being in the movie, he brings the material down. We shall see. But I'm curious, what do you think? How does this film sound to you? Are you as high on it as Hollywood is? And what do you think of adding Jared Leto and Chris Evans to the mix? Good or bad? Now on to the viewer question. This actually came from Movie Math yesterday. I believe I've covered this, I mentioned it before, but I wanted to reiterate it, especially because we're entering awards season and there are so many limited releases. So this comes from Starlord 234. And Starlord says, Grace, what is the purpose of releasing a film on a limited release? Doesn't it just hinder the chance of a good opening weekend? Love the show from Yorkshire in the UK. Oh, well, hello from across the pond, Starlord. Thank you for your question. And I think, again, as I said, it's a very good time to bring it up because we're entering award season when so many films are introduced in such a fashion. So here's why you do a limited release. Let's take Sicario. Now, Sicario has a cast where it's a little bit uneven, right? Emily Blunt, never been a big box office performer. In fact, I've labeled her many times box office poison. Then you have Josh Brolin. No one's ever paid money to see Josh Brolin. And Benicio Del Toro, also not someone that people pay to go and see. He's a prestigious actor. Everybody here is loved by the critics and has their fans. But they consistently do not deliver at the box office. So I think Lionsgate, rightfully so, says, hey, Denis Villeneuve, wonderful director, he also has not had a financial hit in the United States. So he's not even a name that we can really plug really hard. So we really have nothing that's going to, really capture this mainstream moviegoer's attention, right? So if we release Sicario as a wide release, it's only going to debut, pretty low down, right? 5 or 6 or 7. So, if we debut it, Star-Lord, as a wide release, we have no chance for a good opening weekend, actually. So what we're going to do is we're going to only release it as they did in 6 theaters. And by releasing it in 6 theaters, we're going to take everybody who wants to see it and we're going to condense them down to a fantastic per theater average, right? Basically, everybody who wanted to see Sicario, to the most part, went to see it opening weekend, right? Because that's where it was going to do the bulk of its business anyway, New York and LA, which is where it pretty much opened. But if you had a wide release, you would have spread that audience out over multiple theaters and had a very poor per theater average. So what you do is you condense into 6, make everybody go to the same few theaters, and you deliver a very strong per theater average of around 66,000 was what the number came out to be. Now, to prove that Lionsgate did the right thing, that's not the most amazing per theater average you can have. That's actually like half or even less than half than some of the hottest limited releases of all time in terms of per theater averages. As I said, American Sniper, Imitation Game, Grand Budapest Hotel, many films have had way over 100,000 per theater average when they open in limited release, and around the same number of theaters as Sicario, around 5, approximately 5. So Sicario couldn't even perform at the level of a very strong limited release, so they were right to do a limited release. However, fortunately for Sicario, everybody else recently in limited releases have had a crap per theater average, like really low. Like even when they had around 5 theaters, they weren't able to get into the almost above, let's say, 30,000. So because Sicario benefited from comparison, it has the 66,000 per theater average. Suddenly, everyone's talking about Sicario. It gets great headlines because of that per theater average. Headlines it wouldn't have gotten. It would have gotten negative headlines if it had opened wide. Then, since people are talking about it and then in a positive way, while the movie slowly rolls out, and they mention this in the discussion of the sequel, that they're sticking to their guns on a slow rollout for Sicario, because I think they realize the per theater average, while very impressive, was not as impressive as it could be. They don't want to get ahead of themselves. So they're going to slowly roll this movie out, and also it creates the laws of, supply and demand, and also if something's in short supply, I think demand often goes up, right? You're like, well, maybe I wasn't going to see Sicario, but since they're making me wait for it and everyone's talking about how awesome it is, or at least people are going to see it, I should now go see it. So it suddenly becomes on your radar. Suddenly comes on your radar. So that's what it is. It's all about building momentum, buzz, a strong, a positive impression of the movie. It's all about the PR angle, and that's why you do it. If they felt these movies would have a very high opening weekend, if they were open to them wide, they'd open them wide. If a movie's open in limited release, it's because the studio feels that they have something good here, they have a good film, but it's not good enough to capture the widest possible audience right off the bat. It needs award wins. It needs word of mouth. It needs a high per theater average to get that good headline. It needs all those things to convince people to go and see it, because the movie itself and the ad campaign itself just aren't enough. So that's the strategy for limited release. And I know it's frustrating for some of you, but Sicario, I believe, will be considered a very strong performer, and it already has sequel talk because of this strategy. And if they had gone for a wide release, I believe it would have just been, it just would have came in very weak and then just died away. All right, so that's Morning Movie News. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for your questions, Star-Lord. Thank you, everybody. Please let me know what you think of today's top 3 stories, your own thoughts on it, and anything, of course, that you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.